Okay, I think we're going to get this started. So, everyone in the back, everyone joining us today, if anyone's curious of what we're doing up here, we are doing a live podcast here as the Ag Center, day 2 at the World Ag Expo. We have assembled a wonderful panel of, in my opinion, water expertise ranging from all different levels. At the Ag Center, we cease to try to bridge the gap between people wondering what is all this government talk, what is all these programs, and reality of what we do in the field. And so my name is John Paul. I am one of the members of the Ag Center. I'm joined by a ton of members of the Ag Center here today, the whole team. Thank you all for being here. Wonderful representations of the companies. But truly, 5 years ago, this journey set out to help ease growers. And so I think this conversation really points towards really the epitome of why the Ag Center exists. So I'm a 4th-gen organic stone fruit grower. I'm a multi-generational grower, and I think a lot of people walking these grounds have ties to multi-generational farms or are looking at ways of how we can pass the farm on to the next generation. And so being that, that was our motivation behind assembling everyone here today to talk about what does water security mean? What does your risk look like? What are the solutions that may be available right now to growers? And then if not, what do we look like as an entire valley? Because a lot of the news that we read and hear is it's politicized. Water has been the most highly politicized topic, especially in the last 10 years because of the drought. And so we want to give a very well-rounded, multi-layer perspective of maybe what we can expect, what we know today, and how we can work together as an entire industry to bring solutions forward and just understand how we can do better. So with that, I would like to start with an introduction of the panel. Got right in the middle, we've got Valerie Kincaid. Why don't you start off, give a little background of yourself, and then I'll let everyone else kind of follow in.
Sure. Is this on? Great. My name is Valerie Kincaid. I'm a partner at a law firm called Paris Kincaid Wachewski in Sacramento, and we specialize in representing irrigation districts, surface water operators, and since 2014, more and more groundwater sustainability agencies helping folks comply with the new Groundwater Sustainability Act. So that's what I do on my day-to-day, and it's fun to be out here and see everyone on the ground.
Hi, my name is Don Wright. JP, thank you in the Ag Center for having us. I publish waterrights.net. I've been a reporter for 30 years, mostly here in the Valley, and I've been specializing in ag irrigation for the past 2 decades.
Hi, I'm Steve Blumenshine. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Interim Executive Director of CSU Water. CSU stands for California State University, the system, the largest in the country. Water stands for Water Advocacy Towards Education and Research. So my job is to come to events like this and marshal the vast resources we have in the CSU system, administrators, campuses, nearly 25,000 faculty, nearly 500,000 students, many of whom will be your future workforce, with people like you. So I love to listen and talk about the issues and how we can link those entities together.
Yeah, my name is Chase Hurley. I was born and raised on a small family farm in Los Banos. I actually have some friends out in the audience that come off of small dairies in the same area. So for 25 years, I worked and managed 2 water districts, one that was a Central Valley Project water contract, and the other one that was a water right holder off the San Joaquin River. So I worked for them for 25 years, managing their resources, working with their farmers. And now, around 4 or 5 years ago, I started my own business, working with producers and working with water districts, trying to manage the resource up and down the valley.
Yeah, Steve Jackson. Again, I was born in the valley here as well. Farmed on the west side of the valley for about 3 decades. Got involved in water issues out there, served on a number of water boards, and just had a real passion for this issue. And in the last few years, I've been doing this private consulting and trying to make some positive solutions for growers, making sure we have a better future. So.
Perfect. Well, thank you. So we're going to start this off with the over-lingering question of SGMA and what does that look like, and where we're at in terms of the past few years of development in that program. Dawn, I think that you've been more than exposed in many of the regions of California what's going on. So I'm going to let you introduce that update on what's going on.
Okay. Just a little history. SGMA stands for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014. Now, this was written by a female senator down in, help me with her name. Fran Pavley, thank you. Ms. Pavley down in Santa Barbara, not in a particularly high ag producing area, and by an urban assemblyman who's, now help me with his name, Roger Dickinson, yes, out of Sacramento. The idea is quite often groundwater throughout the United States is managed by the government to some regulation, some form. Arizona has a similar thing. They spent 5 years studying how to write the law. What California did is they got two people from non-ag areas to write the law and told everybody else, here, you try and figure out how to put it together. So by 2017, they divided the California's divided into hydrological basins and subbasins. So each subbasin was tasked with developing a groundwater sustainability agency. And this thing, like so many government things, it's just rife with acronyms and initials. So forgive me if I start getting out in the weeds with that. Somebody just say, I'm happy to try to explain what the initials stand for. GSAs, Groundwater Sustainability Agencies. These agencies are tasked with developing a groundwater sustainability plan, and it has to come to fruition by 2040. The plan says by 2040 you will not withdraw more water than you're recharging. And it's been pretty horrendous because it started off in 2017. We started getting some real dry years. This is the first really good wet year we've had yet. So it's left a lot of questions. There's been, it could have been written a lot better, but we do have to do something. As most of the farmers know, our surface deliveries have been consistently cut back since the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which I think was, when was that? Back in the 80s, wasn't it? 92, back in the 90s. So we consistently get less and less surface water, forcing growers to pump more. Well, you know, that's wasteful. You should be growing higher value crops. Okay, so we put in permanent crops and switched to drip irrigation. Well, now we're not recharging through flood. So the whole conjunctive system of taking the snow melt, flooding the land and irrigating that way, recharging the aquifer for pumping, it got short-circuited. And so we do have to have something, or we will run dry. Sigma is probably the best you're going to get in California, but there's still some room for improvement. With that, anything else I need to add, Val? I know you got a good handle on it.
Sure. Thanks, Don. I'll take it from there. So I'll talk a little bit about Sigma compared to our surface water, why the timing is really interesting on Sigma, and then maybe leave us with some solutions, kind of back to what JP was talking about how do we move forward, right? So we know we have a highly regulated system, and Sigma came on in 2014. Maybe an interesting number is that in 1914, 100 years earlier, the surface water permitting system came online. So you have 100 years between the two systems, and frankly, they're very, very different. Surface water is a permitting system, and Sigma 100 years later comes on and is a management system. You have 100 years in between the surface water system permitting, bringing on a highly regulatory body with the State Water Resources Control Board. And then 100 years later, you have local agencies emboldened with this power and the requirement to manage, not permit, but manage groundwater. And interestingly, you have Sigma comes online right at the same time where you're having a significant amount of surface water unreliability, right? If you look at the state water, there's this kind of famous chart. If you look at the State Water Project ag deliveries from 1967 to 2000, there's only 6 years where 100% of contract supplies were not delivered. That was like 77, 78, 92, 93, all in there. Really, really significant drought periods. And then you move from 2000 to current to 2023, we only have had 100% allocation to ag 1 year. out of that last 23 years, okay? So if you look at the chart, it's like 100%, 100% super drought, 100%, 100% super drought. You hit 2000 and we're all over the map. It's a wild fluctuation. So how do we plan for that, okay, right? And Sigma comes on in 2014. That's kind of everyone's safety net. Some people, of course, are using groundwater 100%, but surface water users, when they are getting those 0% allocations, which used to be few and far between, they rely on groundwater. But now we're in a scenario where we're all over the place. People are reaching back into that safety net much more often, right at the same time where it's becoming regulated. Okay, so you have this kind of two things coming together, and you can kind of see the train coming down the tracks, and it's gonna be a huge issue. So you've got all of this regulation, and you've got a huge amount of unreliability in both our surface water system and our groundwater system. So what can we do? And I always say there's three things that if you're coming into the water world today, you should know about. It's the ICC, it's innovate, collaborate, and combat. And innovation has to be, we have to figure out where we can get water, right? I mean, we're all tightening the belts. We're all thinking of new ways to get it. You cannot sit back and just wait for your irrigation district to supply you anymore. You've got to talk to other growers. You've got to reach out. There are a lot of irrigation districts that are flush and have surplus water a lot of years. You've got to figure out who those folks are and begin to encourage your districts to make deals with them. You know, obviously desalinization, recharge, we're hearing a lot about that. Take these big gulps, put them in the ground. So innovate. We're gonna have to think of different ways to do this. We gotta do more with less. Second is collaborate. A lot of times people have heard about the voluntary agreements. Where there is room to come together and create your own destiny, do it. Come together, collaborate. I don't particularly like regulation, but if I can pave my own way and I know what's coming, that's going to help your reliability as well. So sign up where you can, do long-term contracts, collaborate with other agencies. And then, frankly, probably, unfortunately, where I come more into play is combat. And I know there's a huge amount of fatigue with growers out there. There's a huge amount of fatigue with all of our irrigation districts. They're sick of fighting. It's expensive. It doesn't get you more water immediately on farm. So it's the worst way to spend money. But I can tell you that the State Water Resources Control Board is working 100% of the time on new regulations, on stronger regulations. You have to know what those are, and you have to push back when they go too far. So we've got to innovate, we got to collaborate where we can, and frankly, we have to combat. Some of this is going too far. We've got to figure out where the State Water Resources Control Board is overstepping their bounds, and you have to not only know where that is, but be willing to fight about it. So those are my thoughts. I know that was kind of a quick and way to do it, but I'm happy to pass it off.
Both of you, that was perfect. Steve, I'm going to give this to you because being on the more the administrative system and with the CSU system, you've got something to follow up here too and give an idea of what you guys are doing on your side to help us on the outside. And then I guess at that point we'll pass down, maybe Chase and Steve can follow up more on a Northern Valley and a Southern Valley based on what we hear off there. So here you go.
Right. JP's absolutely right. We don't have a stake. We listen to everybody, and we believe that water comes in all colors. Like I came up with a couple mantras in our new directions for CSU Water. One is make every water molecule work harder, and another is STEM can't do it alone. That means scientists and engineers can't do it alone. Honestly, that's part of the problem in getting us where we are now. We need social scientists to work together and communicate. So I want to bridge some of the points that Don made and Valerie made and encapsulate what we're doing and then hand off to our other panel members. So Don was really good in not getting too deep into the weeds with the acronyms and the complexities, but that's what we have. We have complex problems that build up from a legacy of water management, and here we are now, and what's the future going to look like? We don't know what the water supplies are going to look like, but we know about where the demand is for all the water users to grow food, for the environment, for urban growth, rural growth, and sustainability as well. So we have these complex problems which are getting very urgent, thus the creation of SGMA. And the solutions are complex with SGMA and its management. For example, Don mentioned the GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, and the GSPs, these groundwater service plans. How are you going to build into compliance and groundwater balance by 2040, which is probably going to be too late? So with that, about 15 months ago, over a lunch meeting that Don and I had, what we do on the academic side to do research and help solve some of these problems with the CSU resources is to think about where are the knotty problems. We love knotty problems and addressing them. We like to ask why things are the way they are. So we have a project, a funded project on Sigma. I have some information on it, on some brochures there where that sledgehammer is, right, Brad, where that gentleman's walking there. And so among the objectives in this study are, we see that a lot of the groundwater sustainability plans were not deemed acceptable by DWR. What is it, 75, 80% in our 5-county region.
12 out of 20. 12 out of 20 and all in the valley, 100%.
There's more. So we are studying, we're making great headway in this. What were the reasons given? What check boxes for why this is wrong for each of those GSPs were delivered? And we're seeing if those reasons were uniform across our 5-county region, or they vary geographically, for example. Second is there something about the geography, water supply, and farming in those different regions from Madera down to Bakersfield about the water supplies, the nature of water delivery, and what crops are grown? Is there something about that of why these GSPs are not coming into the acceptable realm that they desire? And then finally, the GSAs are mandated to do outreach efforts to growers and water users in their subbasins. Well, we're in the great position where we could talk to the GSA administrators and we could talk to the water stakeholders, and sometimes I'm on an hour-long call and I say 5 words, I'm just listening. I'm going to start charging therapy rates pretty soon. So I hear from both sides, which is really fascinating. And so for months, we've been creating a survey instrument. I now know surveys are no thing you put together the night before. It takes a lot of effort and work and compliance. So we are launching our survey to ask water users of to what extent do you engage with your GSA and how they're going to manage water for your water future. And then we're asking the GSAs, what efforts are you doing to outreach to water users? So back on one of the documents I have under that sledgehammer there is a purpose of our study, what we're doing, and then a QR code you could save on your phone, for example. And your responses over just a couple minutes will go to a Qualtrics survey and database that we're compiling towards these efforts. And to Valerie's point, just to wrap this up, that's part of the communication we're trying to foster. The GSAs feel misunderstood by the water users. The water users feel not heard by the GSAs and the water boards, and you name it. They feel not heard, and they can't access resources they need. That's when we go to Sacramento and we pitch white papers. Hey, here's what we hear. You need to kind of change things, so we'll build some evidence for that. Also, I want to take the opportunity to point out things like the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint, which is specifically geared to get people in the room who would not naturally do so otherwise. So I'm on the technical advisory committee along with a lot of others in the Water Blueprint, and we're talking about new ways of water conveyance, getting where it's needed in the state, and solve some of these inequities of water distribution. Hopefully that's enough, and we can go from there.
That was perfect. Thank you. All right, so lots to unpack, and really looking at both of you down here. For those just joining us in the room, 2 gentlemen up next, Mr. Chase Hurley and Mr. Steve Jackson, are going to give a weighed-in opinion based on the regions of California. Chase, let's start with you on the northern side of what we're dealing with here, and maybe dial back some of that background history of where you're at and what you're doing today with Water and Land Solution. I want to ask each and every one of you up here one question to leave the crowd with post this discussion. It'll be the same question, but I'm going to have Don start it back this way and go towards you, okay?
Yeah, so a lot of the clients I work with are trying to figure out how to implement Sigma in a way that does 2 things. One is protect their property values, and 2 is keeps them in business day to day. And it's tough. So a lot of my work is in Merced and Madera counties. We are working on some Sigma-related issues up in Northern California in Glenn County. The difference there is Glenn County is a couple years behind those other 2 counties because they weren't in a subbasin that was deemed critical. So they're in a moderately defined subbasin. But I'll focus on Merced and Madera counties. From my perspective, with the growers that we work for, we've got to figure out how to be creative. We have to figure out new conveyance methodologies, and we have to figure out how to work together. Because at times, I think this is what got us in this issue. And I'm speaking, my parents were farmers. I grew up in the farming community, and farmers are pretty good about every man for himself if they have to be. And there's a reason why we are the last state in the union to have legislation on groundwater. We had a really good surface water supply when the federal and state government built the projects in California as we developed. But a lot of the regions didn't have conveyance infrastructure. They didn't have water rights to the state or federal government, or water rights off of the east side, like Merced Irrigation District, Turlock Irrigation District, with their own facilities and their own water right. So for those folks that were 100% on groundwater, like Valerie talked to, or had to rely on groundwater over the last 10 years, it's gotten really tough. So we do represent folks. You'll hear a Sigma nomenclature called white areas. So white areas are folks that have historically sat outside of a boundary of a water irrigation district, didn't have a quote-unquote guaranteed surface water supply. And for those folks that weren't covered in a GSA, they were by default, they are under the guise of the county. So a lot of the counties weren't set up when Sigma came along in terms of a water resource division, or had the proper people in place with experience. So a lot of these white area growers were left stranded out there trying to figure out how to comply with Sigma, yet not have a surface water component to deal with. So that's where a lot of our work is. So from my perspective, Valerie mentioned it earlier, it's hard to vision, but there are a lot of districts out there with a very good, stable water supply, except for the extreme drought years, which we just came out with. And they are looking nowadays more than ever to find partners to transfer supplemental surface water supply with. So you got to be creative in how you hook up to those folks. If you look in a couple of the wide areas that I work with, in Merced County, for instance, the Merced GSA and the subbasin, the big dog in that subbasin is Merced Irrigation District. Very, very good water right, their own hydroelectric power, et cetera. And they've historically transferred water up and down the state, but now their vision is, we still want to transfer water, but let's try to keep it more at home. So the areas of El Nido, the areas of Red Top, they are trying to put programs and projects together to keep that surface water supply in the El Nido Red Top area with folks that don't right now really have access to surface water. The same thing in the Delta Mendota subbasin up along Interstate 5. It's a mixture of Central Valley Project water contractors off the Delta Mendota Canal, is some local refuges, but the big dog in that subbasin is the San Joaquin River Exchange contractors. You know, over 200,000 acres of some of the best water rights in the state, and they have a historical water transfer program. So if you're in that subbasin, you should be knocking on their door, trying to put programs and transfer projects together to keep that water local within that subbasin. And the state did a really good job of developing a water system back in the 40s and 50s, and it runs from north to south for the most part. The east side the east side districts, they have their own dams and conveyance system to their own boundary. But we are lacking a lot of conveyance internally within this state. We just haven't built much since the 60s and early 70s. And so we have got a lot of growers and a lot of districts understood that if you build some projects and you build some pipelines and you build some ditches, there are folks like me and district managers, you get hooked up into the system, we can move water around the state pretty good, but you got to get hooked up. So one big issue in the Merced and Madera area is subsidence. And we have, working with local banks, lending institutions, and farmers, we've convinced them that build some facilities and the water will come. And it's hard to envision when you go through a couple years of drought, but we spent millions of dollars on some local projects, built some pipelines that were dry for the first 3 or 4 years. But then we got in some good water years, and we've moved 7,000 to 10,000 acre feet of water into some areas that have never before had surface water. So build some projects, we can get some water moved around, and then we just got to convince the state that we got to build more storage. And that's going to be a long process. So Sigma, what the legislature did is they gave us local control. If we can't figure it out locally, they will eventually take it over, and you don't want it in the State Water Board's hands. So we still have a long ways to go, but incrementally, I think we're making some progress.
Okay, I'll tackle the south part of the valley here. Again, just a quick background. I have farmed on the west side, and then was, I guess, privileged to serve on a couple of GSA boards, and it was our task to, so sitting there in those boards for a number of years, we were struggling with how to go about this sustainability deal. I really appreciate, Valerie, what you just said about some of these issues that we face, and it was a struggle. So I did that for a number of years, and then just about 2 years ago, struck out on doing consulting with growers. And I also wear a hat. I grow almonds here in the greater Kauai area, or outside of Visalia, in a wide area that Chase referenced. So I've been involved quite heavily in the Kauai, the Tulare Lake Basin, and then quite a bit in the Kern County area as well. So there's a lot of issues. I love the comment, the collaboration. I think that's the biggest, I would say, struggle. I think everybody want to be in their own silo, and especially the districts that have the water. I think locally, like TID, Tulare Irrigation District, I get it. I've been there, and I think though for us to be sustainable, and sometimes I wonder if we're going to meet the 2040 timeline. We are going to have to collaborate. And again, to dovetail off what Chase has said, I think the infrastructure needs that we've got to continue to work on that down here in our area. And then the politics, I think, that you see happening, I think over time we will come together. I'm optimistic in that. I was involved in some of the dysfunction in the Tulare Lake Basin personally, regrettably, but I think over time, patience, and I think cooler heads will prevail, hopefully, because if we don't get our act together, the state regrettably will step in. So I hope, my hope is that we can work through these issues. Sustainability is a unique term. I'm always thinking, and I tell growers too, I say, hey, just watch your water levels. And I think I had a well failure on my farm last year. Our well dropped, I think, to 250 feet standing water level. It was historically about 140, and we had a well failure. And so it brought home the impacts that we're dealing with. And even I just tested it, just quick aside, we looked at it just a couple days ago, and we were back to 139. So it rebounded. It's amazing what a wet year will do. So I think collaboration locally, I think what we can do here, growers, we're going to have to be proactive. I know it's very overwhelming with all these regulations coming at us all the time. That's probably why we're here, or Chase and I are doing stuff, because a lot of times growers just don't have the time or the focus to really make a plan. Because if we don't work together, have a good plan, what we're going to leave our children, our grandchildren, is not a pretty picture. I don't believe we should. I hope that we're not going to have to see a million. They talk about this huge 1 million acres potentially being fallowed in the San Joaquin Valley, which to me is catastrophic. I pray that we don't get there, but I think what we have to do to avoid that is we're going to have to collaborate. We're going to have to be innovative. I think your acronym, Valerie, is great. I'm just going to write that note down to myself here. But there's going to be a time to be combative too, and I'll leave it with this. I still serve on the Kern Water Bank board. That was kind of a legacy thing that I've done. I was actually in the Kern Water Bank when it was founded back in 1996, and saw that project just bloom over the last 30 years. But we've been in constant combat for litigation for almost 25 years. So I think we don't like to be there. But as Valerie sees, I think we're going to have to stand up for our rights and push back. I think the regulations that we see in Sacramento and how the Delta is being managed, I think you saw a lot of outcry the last few months when we saw so much water go out. And I think we saw a lot of people, even in areas in Southern California that normally would not have addressed it, actually woke up and said, hey, why are we losing all this water going out to the ocean, and we have these pumps that are not working? So I think we've got to be ready to be combative and fight for what our future looks like in the valley. We have the most productive farm ground in the world here. And so I think, I know all of us up here have a personal passion to see us sustain that platform production here in the Central Valley. I'll leave it at that.
That was great. Thank you. So let's tie this up with a question, and it's kind of a dual prong approach. So there's two layers of this answer that I'd like from all of you. In my opinion, being a young grower, it's an honor. It's an honor to take it forward. And so I look at every grower in the state of California, whether you're in dairy or row crop or in permanent crop, as a group, a big family. We're a family of growers. As much as I see on the other side, people like yourselves who are fighting for us on this side of things, but you're dealing with more of a higher level and facing some of those challenges for us on that side. My question to you in answering to a grower, but then also with your colleagues and with people that are at a higher level, how we can bridge some of this engagement. What can us growers do to help the lives, Valerie, like you lobbying, or Chase on your side, Steve with yours, and both of you at the same time? What can we do as growers? One thing better, right, as a grower group. And on the same side, how do you feel maybe on more of the executive side of things, how can we bridge that gap between growers and people? Because there's a lot of different things going on here. We've got a lot of family farms that still are shrinking. We've got a lot of corporate money coming in, equity firms. There's a lot of commingling of different types of groups now, right? But it doesn't water down. We're still growers. So how can we help you, and how can you help us? And Dawn, you've been all over the state. You can tell us kind of, maybe start that off. So grower, and then from your side of the fence too.
I told you I could answer one question, and that wasn't it. All right. Let me make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. One, what needs to happen? What can the grower do to make this a better situation? And secondly, bridge a gap with the thing. Well, I'm going to say something. It's not going to be popular here. Farmers are probably the worst group I've ever experienced for telling their story, for telling that compelling story. They do not do it. They'll let somebody else do it. They will sit around. They don't care. They're like herding cats. So we've got a few organizations out there that are doing an excellent job of education, and you can text all the housewives in LA County and tell them where their food comes from and educate them. But the enemy is in Sacramento, and I'm going to say enemy. This water board, the State Water Resources Control Board, is appointed by the governor. They are not accountable, except to Newsom. They just let, in the month of January 2023, last month, there was enough water, excess water, that went out to the sea through the Delta to keep the Los Angeles Basin whole for 10 years. Now tell me if they're being serious up there in Sacramento or not. They're not. They're the enemy. I don't mean that in a mutinous way or a traitorous way, but they're not serious people. They're not taking the livelihood of our food security, of our communities, the most vulnerable part of our population. And Steve can refer to this a little bit more. They're called DACs, disadvantaged communities. They're not disadvantaged. They're here to find advantage. And I'm not going to steal your thunder, Steve, but farm workers are farmers. Farmers are farm workers. And we have a bunch of other things called non-governmental organizations, NGOs. I'm going to name two of them: the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability and the Community Water Center, that are constantly putting farmers down as being racists. If you go to the state board website, it says the most important problem facing California is racial equity, not drought, not flood, a Marxist concept called racial equity. Farmers need to start realizing you got to fight back. Now, how would I do that? I'm a reporter. I don't get a whole lot of traction writing to my elected official as I do to the other reporters. If you read somebody from the LA Times that writes a scathing story, call them up and say, hey, how about if you add some balance to it? I'm a grower. I can help you find the other side of the story that's not been covered. I see it all the time. They'll talk about the problem of ag pumping, and they never interview a farmer or a farm worker. Those, I don't know. And the ultimate solution that not ultimate, but the other solution that was mentioned earlier, Dr. Blumenshine and I are both on committees with the Water Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley. The last time we've had any serious committed infrastructure, water infrastructure, there were 16 million people in California. We're 40 million now. The fish screens, the reason we do not pump up in the Delta is for endangered species. Those fish screens are 60 years old. They no longer serve their purpose. The blueprint has a way that would protect all of the fish from any problems with the pump. We could get that average 10 million acre foot per year. We need 2.5 million brought down into this valley to keep Sigma from fallowing 1 million acres. So be aware that there are some good solutions. We just got to get the folks in Sack of Tomatoes to pay attention.
Thanks, Don. Don was hoping the question is, what does he want for lunch? But thanks for that, JP. And I learned some things from Don, and one of those is I think everyone's familiar with the idea of parking lot talks or coffee shop talks. Part of your message, if I understand it, is get that out of the coffee shop in the parking lot into other people's ears who could do some action. So, like I said, that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, is we listen to groups and see what's needed. And we could do some outreach to marshal those ideas to a greater strength. To the extent that you as a grower or water user are organized, let's make those connections. I'll use one example. Westside Water Authority, they're based in Bakersfield. I had a great 2-hour meeting with them, 2-hour lunch in Visalia, and we agreed that they said, we are understaffed, we're kind of a new entity, understaffed, don't have the expertise, don't have the time to do a lot of things that need to be done. So 2 weeks after that lunch meeting, which is really quick, they produced a list of 7 projects with multiple bullet points under each of those projects. I said, all right, let me run with that, and we'll figure out how to fund that, how to make that work, whether it's your membership or external sources. So if your entity, like whatever herd you run with or group you belong with, come together in those coffee talks and make a list of what you need, and we could help marshal that. For example, we're the CSU system. It's public. We get money from the state. The state loves it if they leverage our budget to get help to public entities, in growers, people who produce the food and move the water. So communication and put us to work for you is best I could do it. And like I said, there's more information there. I could talk to you later. I have plenty of business cards. I love to hear these stories and link people together to solve problems.
Thanks. All right, so I think the question is, what can growers do? And I guess 2 things. One is get informed. You know, there's the Farm Bureau, there's Western Growers, there are a lot of industry organizations, the Ag and the Ag Center. And you've got to tap into that, and you've got to demand information, because really you don't know what you don't know. My full-time job is knowing exactly what water regulation is coming up and who it imposes a risk on. That is a lot of work. And these folks talk to people like me, and they can get that message out. So if one, you don't know what you don't know, get to know it. And then the second thing is be demanding. You know, we've gotten into this lull where I don't know if it's fatigue or COVID. I know we see a lot of our clients. I mean, litigation is tough, and it's hard to really have that resilience. Ag is an incredibly resilient industry, but don't let that resilience work in your disfavor. And what I mean by that is ag keeps taking a hit, and we keep figuring out a way to get out of it. We kind of figure out a way to move on, and we don't ever stand up and say, this is too much. It's too big of a hit. We need reliability in supplies. And at some point, we're going to have to stand up and say that. And I know it's not popular, and I know we live in this like cancel culture, so we all have to be careful, and I know that very well, but we have to be demanding. We have to say, listen, we pay for CVP and SWP water every year, regardless if we get it. That's true. You pay for it, even if you get a 0 allocation. You should know that. You should stand up for it, and you should demand legislation that says we're not going to keep paying for this if you deliver 0, 5, 10%. Demand more. Know what's going on and demand what you need as a grower. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things that the growers that we represent could do better. And one is I try to keep as many small farmers in business as possible. That's how I grew up on small family farms. And I don't define small family farms in terms of how many acres you grow, but it's trying to keep the generations on the ranch. Because we have a lot different type of farmers in California today than we did 20 or 30 years ago, and it's just an evolution. So what I tell my guys is, as your kids are growing up on the farm, for every 2 that stay on the farm to help you, got to have 1 that will matriculate off the farm. And whether it's being in the profession that Valerie does, representing you from the legal side, whether it's being a legislature in the state, you got to get some of your family members off the farm to promote agriculture and promote your way of life, because it is truly a way of life that we're sort of losing in California. So one is get some of your family members off the farm to represent and still be involved in the day-to-day farming. And the second thing is farmers do a really good job about going down to the coffee shop and talking amongst each other and talking amongst themselves and complaining. But here's the thing, and I'll give you an example in Delta. There's constant lawsuits from people in the Delta, whether it's fishery agencies or farmers in that area, that are suing south diverters. And we've been suing each other and going back and forth legally for a long time. But here's what doesn't happen is the family farms are really good about saying, we've been here for 3 or 4 generations and we need to stay here. Well, you know what? You've got local fishermen in the Bay Area that have 3rd or 4th generation too. And they're saying, hey, our fisheries are going backwards. We have to promote our way of life and continue for future generations. But our farmers never go to Benicia and have coffee or dinner with those generational fishermen. We don't do it. We have lawyers banging each other across the head and fighting for years and not getting anything done. I think if we got in the room with those generational fishermen and understood their issues, understand the issues of what's going on in the Delta better, we can come up with some creative solutions, but we're not too good at doing that. So you guys, as farmers, go out and help us do that, and we, as folks trying to keep you in business, will come up with creative solutions.
I'll just add a little bit to what we're at. I think being involved in water policy for so many years, it's always amazing to me how few people really show up to these meetings. And it really is, it's local, lately in the last few years, these decisions being made are affecting us for generations to come. So I would just echo again, be involved, pay attention to where you're at, wherever you're farming, make sure you understand who your GSA manager is, who's on your board. Call the board members. I was on a board, number of boards, and it's important that we work and talk and raise up and be involved in what's going on. Because as we're talking about, we've got to collaborate. I keep thinking of that word, we got to collaborate on stuff, but as well, we got to be prepared to fight back. I think, again, the message for us here in the Valley is we've got to pay attention to what is happening in Sacramento, and how we can best come together as agencies, as sub-basins, which would be a bunch of GSAs. We're going to have to work. And that's one of the things I think that's been a little frustrating, but I think we're starting to turn around a little bit. The GSAs have been fairly siloed. The state does not look at us as individual GSAs. They look at us as sub-basins. So I think that that process is starting to, I think, move that direction, which is where we got to go. We got to manage our water assets, our groundwater, sub-basin wide. So those messages got to be, most growers just don't have time. So I would say just stay involved, pay attention, grab some help. If we're here, some of us are out here doing this on a full-time basis. So I'm optimistic that we can get there. I just don't know, but we got to stay involved. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank every single one of you for participating in this. This concludes our water assessment and risk and security panel. I learned a lot. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to getting this out for more people to hear. And anyone has any particular questions, please engage with the Ag Center, and we can parlay that into anyone up at this panel or anyone here in the crowd. Want to pull anyone aside? Please feel free to do so. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the World Ag Expo.